By 1912, all major modern countries of the world had formed a military flying service. In the United States, it was present in name only. While other nations of the world made advances in military aviation, almost no progress was made in the United States. The U.S. Army had purchased a single Wright biplane in 1908, and for 3 years this one plane was the entire Air Force. Then in 1911, Congress appropriated funds to purchase 5 more airplanes. By the end of 1913, there were 19 aircraft and 29 pilots in the U.S. Army. In 1914, when World War I started, Germany had 200 aircraft in its Air Force. Britain and France possessed about 450. More importantly, they also had the industry needed to make more aircraft. The United States did not enter World War I until 1917. Even with 3 years to prepare, the United States did not have a single combat-worthy aircraft when it entered the war. To make the situation worse, Curtiss Aircraft was the only company in the United States that could be considered an aviation industry. In 1917, Congress appropriated $64 million for construction of aircraft, boasting that we would darken the skies over Europe with U.S. aircraft. Congress promised 263 American squadrons equipped with 22,000 aircraft, which would be in action by June 1918. However, when the war ended in November 1918, there were only 45 American squadrons in action, and they were all flying British or French aircraft. Not a single American-designed combat aircraft saw action in World War I. The United States wound up building some British-designed DH-4 aircraft that saw some action from September 1918 until the end of the war in November. This was the first example of short-sightedness of the United States Congress with regard to aviation. Unfortunately, this mistake would be repeated over and over again. What Congress overlooked was that the United States did not possess the engineers to design the aircraft, the industry to build them, or the instructors and planes with which to train pilots. Without these resources, there would be no strong aviation history. Throughout the history of aviation, the greatest progress in flight has been made during times when neither war or threat of war was present. When the war started in 1914, the average aircraft had speeds of 70 to 80 miles an hour, but could not go any higher than 10,000 feet. By the time World War I ended, the speed of the aircraft had increased to 140 to 150 miles per hour, and they can operate up to 24,000 feet. At the beginning of World War I, the German Army had 20 large dirigibles, 9 built by Zeppelin and 11 by other German manufacturers. During the war, an additional 88 Zeppelins were produced. Germany's plans were to use these aircraft as strategic bombers against French and English cities. On August 9, 1915, they made their first raid over London. These raids were very accurate with their bombings, but because the airships were filled with flammable hydrogen, the slightest damage caused them to burst into flames. Therefore, they only began flying at night. In 1916, it was clear a replacement was necessary, and it came in the form of a large twin-engine bomber called the Gotha 4. Beginning in April 1917, these bombers dropped tons of bombs on English cities and factories. Although these raids caused considerable damage and many deaths, the most important impact was that the English had to recall some of their fighter squadrons from France to protect the homeland. Another outcome of the German air raid was the formation of the Independent Bombing Force within the British Royal Flying Corps. This was the first and only Allied flying force during World War I that was not under the command of an infantry-trained general officer. This later became the Royal Air Force. By the time the war ended, strategic bombing had grown from a few observation planes with pilots dropping small handheld bombs to large, specifically designed bombers capable of carrying up to 6,000 pounds of bombs. As more and more bombing raids took place, it became clear that the control of the air was needed. Fighter or pursuit aircraft were needed to drive off the bombers. At first, the armament of these fighters consisted of the pilot shooting at the enemy with a pistol or rifle. In 1915, a French pilot, Roland Garros, mounted an automatic rifle on his aircraft so he could fire forward through the propellers. To keep shooting off his own propeller, the rear of the prop was armed with steel plates to deflect the bullets. As primitive as this device was, it was quite effective because for the first time the pilot could aim his guns by flying directly at the aircraft. Garros was shot down behind German lines and his aircraft was captured. After examining the armored propeller, the Germans gave a Dutch aircraft designer, Anthony Fokker, the task of improving this device. Fokker designed a interrupting gear which connected a machine gun to the aircraft engine and prevented the gun from firing when the propeller blade was lined up with the gun's muzzle. This allowed the machine gun to be fired through the spinning propellers. For nearly a year, this invention gave the Germans almost total control of the air. In 1916, a German aircraft equipped with this interrupting gear was captured and the Allies soon copied it, and it was the start of the great dogfight era air battles. As aerial combat increased, the French developed a method of recognizing pilots who shot down many enemy aircraft. They coined the term ace for a pilot who shot down 5 enemy aircraft. This same number was adopted by the British and the Americans. The Germans, however, required 10 enemy aircraft to be down before recognizing the pilot an ace. The term ace of aces was given to the pilot from each nation with the most kills, and included as ace of aces during World War I were Edward V. Rickenbacker, who is American with 26 victories, René Fonck, a Frenchman with 75 victories, Edward Manock, a British citizen with 73 victories, and Baron Manfred von Richthofen, Germany, who had 80 victories. Eddie Rickenbacker, an American World War I ace, had 16 kills in 5 months. He's the only American to receive the Medal of Honor in World War I. As mentioned before, the United States didn't recognize aircraft as a game changer and use English and French-built aircraft. But at the start of World War I, Americans living in Paris volunteered to fly for the French. These Americans worked as a group and named themselves the Lafayette Escadrille in honor of the French nobleman who lent his service to the Americans during the Revolutionary War. In March 1917, the month before the United States formally entered World War I, only one of the original members of the Lafayette Escadrille was still living. By the time the war ended, 40 of the gallant Americans responsible for Escadrille's fighting fame had given their lives for the French and Allied cause. 6 of these Americans received ace status while flying for the French Air Service. At first, Lafayette Escadrille was viewed by the French largely as a propaganda device for winning American support during the war effort. The brave Americans, however, proved their value as fighting men. Before the unit was incorporated into the United States Army Air Service in February 1918, the Escadrille confirmed 199 victories.